It started with a sentence that wasn't supposed to be heard. Not leaked, not announced, not posted, just whispered behind a closed door in Washington, D.C. And yet, within 48 hours, that sentence was shaking the foundations of American politics. Because the sentence was simple, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. President Trump has made an offer to Governor Tim Walz. At first, nobody believed it. Then Caroline Leavitt went on camera. And everything changed. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. This is not partisan spin. This is the story of a political offer so unexpected, so strategic, and so explosive that both sides of the American divide were forced to stop, listen, and reassess everything they thought they knew. But to understand why this offer mattered, we need to rewind. Back before the cameras, before the microphones, before the headlines started screaming. Back to a moment when Donald J. Trump was no longer just running for power. He was planning something bigger. Much bigger. At the time, the United States was already fractured. Trust in institutions was low. Election tensions were rising. And state governors had become power players in ways Washington hadn't fully prepared for. And in Minnesota, one man stood firmly on the opposite side of Trump's political universe. Governor Tim Walz, a former congressman, a Democrat, a vocal critic of Trump-era policies, and a governor who had built his reputation on resisting federal pressure. Publicly, the two men couldn't have been further apart. But privately, that's where things got interesting. Because Trump wasn't looking at Walz as an enemy. He was looking at him as a move. A chess piece. A pressure point. According to people close to the situation, Trump had been studying something most analysts ignored. Not polls. Not headlines. Not cable news outrage. Governors. Specifically, Democratic governors in swing-adjacent states. Trump believed something very few people were willing to say out loud. That the next major political realignment wouldn't come from Congress or the courts. It would come from the states. And Minnesota was on that list. Tim Walz, whether he wanted it or not, had leverage. Which brings us back to Caroline Leavitt. When she stepped in front of the cameras, the room expected talking points. They didn't expect a reveal. She didn't shout. She didn't dramatize. She didn't dodge. She stated it plainly. President Trump extended an offer to Governor Walz. That was it. One sentence. But the silence afterward was louder than any speech. Because no one knew what the offer was. A cabinet position. A bipartisan task force. A federal emergency role. A strategic alliance. Social media exploded within minutes. Supporters saw strategy. Critics smelled manipulation. Pundits scrambled for sources. Campaign staffers froze. And Walz's office. They said nothing. Not a denial. Not a clarification. Not a counterstatement. Nothing. That silence told Washington everything it needed to know. This was real. And it wasn't small. Behind the scenes, the offer had been discussed for weeks. Carefully. Quietly. Deliberately. Trump, according to insiders, wasn't offering Walz a symbolic role. He was offering him influence. Real influence. The kind that could reshape policy, redefine loyalty, and redraw political lines. The offer was framed as putting country over party. A phrase that sounds noble. Until you realize how dangerous it can be in the wrong hands. Trump's team believed that if Walz accepted, it would send a message louder than any rally. That even Trump's harshest critics could be brought into the fold. That resistance wasn't permanent. That alignment was possible. For Walz, the stakes were brutal. Accepting the offer could mean national power. Rejecting it could mean becoming a symbol of defiance. Either way, his political future would never be the same. And here's the part nobody talks about. This wasn't just about Trump and Walz. This was about precedent. If a Democratic governor could accept an offer from Trump, what happens next? What happens to party loyalty? To ideological boundaries? To the entire structure of American opposition politics? Within hours of Leavitt's statement, political operatives across the country were already gaming it out. Some saw opportunity. Some saw betrayal. Some saw the beginning of a new political era. Others saw chaos. Because once an offer like that is made public, it can't be taken back. Even if Walz said no. Even if Trump walked it back. The idea was out there. And ideas are harder to contain than policies. By the end of the day, one thing was clear. This wasn't a media stunt. This wasn't a throwaway line. This wasn't noise. This was the opening move. And neither side had revealed their hand yet. In part 2, we'll go inside the offer itself. What Trump actually proposed. Why it was structured the way it was. And why Walz's inner circle reacted with fear instead of excitement. Because the real story doesn't start with the reveal. It starts with the calculation behind it. when the cameras shut off and the headlines began racing each other across the internet, the real drama didn't happen on television. It happened behind closed doors. Inside Governor Tim Walz's office in St. Paul, Minnesota, the mood was tense, controlled, and unusually quiet. No one was celebrating. No one was panicking. But everyone understood one thing. This was serious. The offer itself had arrived days earlier, not by phone, not by email, and not through any official channel that could be easily traced. It came through intermediaries, trusted ones, former officials, policy advisors, people who knew how Washington really worked. They didn't say Trump's name at first. They didn't have to. They spoke in careful language, measured tones, and strategic hypotheticals. What if there was a way to reduce federal-state friction? What if bipartisan cooperation could bypass congressional gridlock? What if a governor could play a national role without changing party affiliation? Each question sounded harmless on its own. Together, they formed a trap. Because at the center of all of it was an offer that no Democratic governor had ever seriously received from Donald Trump. A role with real authority. A position that mattered. Not symbolic. Not ceremonial. Not temporary. The offer, according to sources close to Walz's inner circle, revolved around a federal leadership initiative tied to national crisis coordination. Infrastructure. Supply chains. Emergency response. State-federal alignment. Areas where governors held power. And where Washington was vulnerable. Trump's team believed something critical. That Americans trusted governors more than politicians in D.C. And Tim Walz, whether his critics admitted it or not, had credibility. The proposal was carefully designed to look nonpartisan. It wasn't framed as joining Trump. It was framed as serving the country. And that distinction mattered a lot. Walz's advisors were split almost immediately. Some saw opportunity. If Walz accepted, he could influence policy at the highest level without compromising his values. He could protect Minnesota's interests. He could act as a counterbalance inside a Trump-led framework. Others saw danger. They understood Trump's style. They understood his history. And they understood that no offer from Trump was ever just an offer. It was leverage. One senior advisor reportedly said something chilling during that first internal meeting. If you step into his orbit, you don't control the gravity. The room went silent, because everyone knew it was true. Trump didn't just make deals. He absorbed people. At the same time, Trump's own camp was operating with ruthless precision. This wasn't a spontaneous gesture. This wasn't a media play gone wrong. This was planned. Weeks earlier, Trump had asked a simple question in a private strategy session. Which Democrat would hurt the most if they said yes? The answer wasn't a senator. It wasn't a congressman. It wasn't a media figure. It was a governor. Someone executive. Someone visible. Someone who had managed real crises. Tim Walz fit the profile. Trump's advisors knew Walz had ambitions beyond Minnesota. They knew he valued pragmatism. They knew he believed in governance over theatrics. That made him vulnerable. And Trump knew exactly how to frame the offer. No public pressure. No immediate deadline. No explicit demand. Just the implication. If you say yes, you change the game. If you say no, you stay where you are. Meanwhile, Caroline Leavitt's reveal wasn't accidental either. Trump's team understood media psychology. They knew that once the offer was public, Walz's silence would become the story. And it worked. Cable news panels erupted. Some accused Walz of secretly negotiating. Others praised him for being open-minded. Hardliners on both sides began sharpening their knives. Every hour Walz didn't respond, the pressure increased. Inside Minnesota, party leaders were alarmed. Phone calls poured in. Emails flooded inboxes. Donors wanted answers. Activists demanded clarity. Was Walz considering it? Was he negotiating? Was he betraying the party? Walz himself said very little. According to people close to him, he spent that night reading. Not tweets. Not headlines. Briefings. Historical precedents. Case studies. Moments when political figures crossed lines and paid the price. He understood the risk wasn't just political. It was personal. Because once the public believes you might switch lanes, trust becomes fragile. At the same time, Trump was watching. Not reacting. Not commenting. Waiting. That was his style. Let the silence do the work. And then something unexpected happened. A leak. Not from Trump's side. Not from Walz's office. From someone who had seen the framework of the offer. The leak didn't include documents. It didn't include names. But it included enough. Enough to suggest that the role would have national visibility. Enough to suggest it could outlast a single term. Enough to suggest it wasn't just advisory. The reaction was immediate. Political strategists called it unprecedented. Constitutional scholars debated its implications. Social media turned it into a loyalty test. And still, Walz said nothing. That silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Because Walz understood something critical. If he spoke too soon, he'd lose control of the narrative. If he rejected it outright, he'd never know how far Trump was willing to go. If he accepted, even conditionally, he'd cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. So he waited. And Trump waited too. But behind the scenes, the tone shifted. Trump's intermediaries returned with more detail, more clarity, more structure, more incentive. The offer evolved. It became clear that Trump wasn't just offering Walz a role. He was offering him relevance. A seat at a table where decisions would be made without Congress slowing them down. For a governor who believed in action over ideology, that was tempting. Dangerously tempting. And that's when Walz's inner circle realized something unsettling. This offer wasn't designed to be accepted easily. It was designed to be agonized over. Because even saying no would have consequences. And saying yes, that would change American politics overnight. In part 3, the pressure explodes. We'll examine how party leaders respond, how Trump escalates the stakes, and why a single phone call forces Walz closer to a decision he never planned to face. Because by then, the offer is no longer theoretical. It's personal. By the third day, the silence was no longer neutral. It was loud. In Washington, silence meant calculation. In politics, it meant tension. And in this case, it meant everyone was waiting for someone else to blink. The first to crack wasn't Governor Walz. It was his party. Behind closed doors, Democratic leadership began to panic. Not publicly. Not yet. But internally, the alarms were going off. Senior party figures understood something the public didn't. This wasn't just about one governor. This wasn't just about one offer. This was about control. If Tim Walz even appeared to entertain Trump's proposal, it would legitimize something Democrats had spent years rejecting. The idea that Trump could govern through persuasion instead of force. That he could build coalitions outside party lines. That resistance wasn't absolute. That idea terrified them. Phone calls started coming in from Washington. Not requests. Warnings. Carefully worded. Politely framed. But unmistakably firm. This could damage the party. This will be used against us. This plays into his narrative. Walz listened. He didn't argue. He didn't commit. He absorbed it. But what party leaders didn't know was that the pressure wasn't one-sided. Trump had escalated. Quietly. Methodically. Relentlessly. The intermediaries returned again, this time with specifics. Clear authority. Defined scope. National reach. This wasn't an advisory board. This wasn't symbolic cooperation. It was operational power. A role that would allow Walz to coordinate directly with federal agencies, governors, and emergency leadership across multiple states. And crucially, it would place him above partisan gridlock. Trump's pitch was simple. You don't answer to Congress. You don't answer to party leadership. You answer to the mission. That was the hook. Because Walz had built his career on execution, not ideology. But Trump wasn't done. He added something else. Something unexpected. Something personal. A phone call. Not to Walz. To someone Walz trusted deeply. A former colleague. A mentor. Someone whose judgment Walz valued. The message wasn't aggressive. It wasn't threatening. It was respectful. Trump made his case calmly. He spoke about crisis fatigue. About federal paralysis. About the limits of partisan loyalty. And then he said something that stuck. You can hate me and still do the job. That sentence traveled fast. When it reached Walz, it unsettled him more than any headline ever could. Because it was true. History was full of people who worked with leaders they despised for outcomes they believed in. The question was whether Walz was willing to be one of them. Meanwhile, the media had moved from speculation to framing. The narrative was shifting. This was no longer, did Trump make an offer? It was now, why hasn't Walz rejected it? Opinion pieces flooded the internet. Some accused Walz of ambition. Others praised his restraint. A few suggested he was already negotiating terms. None of it was confirmed. All of it mattered. Because perception, in politics, becomes reality faster than truth ever can. Inside Minnesota, the tension spilled over. Staffers argued. Advisors split into camps. Some pushed for a clean rejection. Others urged continued dialogue. Walz found himself isolated in a way he hadn't been before. Not alone, but alone with the decision. Late that night, Walz requested a private briefing. No aides. No phones. No press. Just data. The briefing focused on one thing. What would happen if he said yes? Not emotionally. Not politically. Structurally. How much power the role would actually hold. How long it could last. how insulated it would be from political retaliation. The findings were disturbing. The role was real, the authority was legitimate, the reach was expansive, and rejecting it wouldn't make it disappear. Trump would simply offer it to someone else. Possibly someone less cautious, someone more loyal, someone with fewer objections. That realization changed the equation. This wasn't about Walz versus Trump. It was about who would occupy the space Trump was creating, and whether Walz trusted himself more than whoever came next. At the same time, Trump's allies began floating a new idea in conservative circles. Not explicitly, not officially, just hints. That Trump was serious about unity. That he was willing to work across lines. That Democrats who engaged weren't traitors. They were patriots. That messaging was deliberate. It was designed to soften backlash, to give cover, to create a landing zone if Walz moved forward. And then came the moment no one expected. A second leak. This one confirmed something critical. The offer included a clause allowing Walz to remain governor while serving in the federal role. That changed everything. Now this wasn't a resignation. It wasn't abandonment. It wasn't surrender. It was dual authority, state and national. The backlash intensified immediately. Party leadership demanded a response. Activists called it unacceptable. Commentators accused Trump of trying to co-opt Democratic leadership. But Walz still didn't speak. Because by now, the decision wasn't just about politics. It was about legacy. Would he be remembered as the governor who crossed the aisle? Or the governor who refused and watched someone else shape national policy? Trump, watching the reaction, smiled. Not publicly, not visibly, but internally, his team knew. The pressure was working. Because Walz wasn't dismissing the offer anymore. He was measuring it, and that meant Trump was closer than anyone realized. In part 4, the moment arrives. A direct conversation. No intermediaries. No filters. Just Trump. Just Walz. And a decision that forces both men to reveal what they really want. Because once they speak directly, there will be no room left for ambiguity. The call didn't come through intermediaries. It didn't come through staff. It didn't come through anyone whose job was to soften the edges. It came directly. Donald J. Trump. Tim Walz. No aides on the line. No lawyers listening in. No notes prepared for the press afterward. Just two men who understood that whatever happened next would shape more than their own futures. Trump spoke first. Not with bravado. Not with performance. Not with the tone the public expected. He was calm. Almost conversational. "I'll get straight to it," Trump said. "This isn't about optics. This is about function." Walz didn't interrupt. He listened. Trump continued. "You know the system is jammed. You've lived it. States are carrying weight Washington can't move anymore." That wasn't flattery. That was validation. And Walz felt it. Trump didn't ask Walz to agree with him. He didn't ask him to like him. He didn't ask him to defend him. He asked him to work. "I don't need loyalty," Trump said. "I need competence." That sentence landed hard, because competence was Walz's currency. Trump laid it out clearly. The role, the authority, the structure. No spin. Walz would lead a federal-state coordination initiative with direct access to agencies that governors usually had to fight to reach. FEMA, transportation, energy, supply chain oversight. It was power without theater. Walz asked the question everyone expected. "What's the catch?" Trump didn't hesitate. "You'll get blamed if it fails," he said. "And you won't get credit if it works." That honesty unsettled Walz more than any hidden clause ever could. Trump went further. "Your party will hate it. My critics will call it a stunt. And if you walk away later, both sides will say you were naive." He paused. "But if you stay out, someone else fills the role. Someone who doesn't care what you care about." That was the pressure point. Trump wasn't threatening Walz. He was replacing him in the future. Walz pushed back. He talked about trust. About Trump's history. About unpredictability. Trump didn't deny any of it. Instead, he reframed it. "You don't have to trust me," Trump said. "You just have to trust the structure." That was the genius of it. The role wasn't built on Trump's personality. It was built on executive authority. Walz asked another question. "Why me?" Trump answered without hesitation. "Because you're not looking for a headline," he said. "And because you won't bend." That answer stayed with Walz long after the call ended. When it was over, there was no agreement. No handshake. No commitment. But there was clarity. For the first time since Caroline Leavitt's reveal, Walz understood the full shape of the offer. And it scared him. Not because it was dangerous, but because it made sense. Within hours, Walz convened his inner circle. This time, there was no speculation. He told them everything. The role, the authority, the risks, the inevitability. The room fractured instantly. Some advisors urged acceptance. They argued Walz could do real good. That refusing would be symbolic, not effective. Others warned it would destroy his credibility. That Trump would weaponize the association. That history would judge him harshly. Walz listened to all of it. But his decision wasn't made in that room. It was made later. Alone. He thought about crises he'd managed. About moments when ideology took a back seat to action. About people who didn't care who was in charge as long as someone was. And then he thought about something else. What Trump had said about blame. About failure without credit. That wasn't a trap. It was a warning. Trump wasn't offering Walz protection. He was offering him exposure. The next morning, Walz requested one more thing. A guarantee. Not political. Not personal. Institutional. He wanted the role codified in a way that couldn't be altered on a whim. Trump's response came faster than expected. Yes. That single word shifted everything. Because it meant Trump was willing to lock himself into a structure he couldn't easily control. And that changed the power dynamic. By midday, rumors began circulating. Not confirmation. Not denial. Just movement. Markets reacted. Political insiders whispered. Party leaders grew frantic. And then Walz did something no one expected. He scheduled a press conference. Not to announce acceptance. Not to announce rejection. But to speak. When he stepped to the podium, the room went silent. He didn't smile. He didn't posture. He didn't dodge. He said one sentence. I have been asked to serve the country in a way that challenges political comfort. That was it. No details. No decision. Just acknowledgement. The reaction was explosive. Supporters demanded clarity. Critics accused him of betrayal. Trump's allies praised his courage. Democratic leadership went into damage control. But Walz had already crossed a line. He had legitimized the offer by acknowledging it publicly. And Trump knew it. That night, Trump's team prepared the next step. Because now, the story wasn't about whether Walz would accept. It was about whether he could afford not to. In Part 5, the pressure reaches its peak. Deadlines emerge. Alliances shift. And Walz is forced to choose between political survival and political impact. Because the country is watching now. And waiting. The moment Governor Tim Walz stepped away from the podium, the countdown began. Not an official deadline. Not a written ultimatum. But a political one. In Washington, staffers were already drafting contingency plans. In party headquarters, crisis meetings stretched late into the night. And across the media landscape, the narrative hardened. Walz was no longer being asked whether he should accept the offer. He was being asked when. Democratic leadership moved first. A private call was arranged. Not confrontational. Not public. But unmistakably urgent. The message was delivered carefully, by people Walz respected. This isn't just about you. This affects down-ballot races. This gives Trump a win he doesn't deserve. They warned him that even engaging had consequences. That ambiguity would erode trust. That voters needed certainty. Walz listened. He always did. But for the first time, he didn't reassure them. He didn't promise alignment. He didn't promise refusal. He simply said he was weighing the national interest. That response alarmed them more than any rejection ever could. At the same time, Trump escalated again. This time, not through words. Through action. His team quietly began laying the groundwork for the initiative. Staffing outlines. Agency coordination plans. Draft frameworks. All without Walz. That wasn't an accident. It was leverage. The message was subtle but clear. This is happening. With or without you. That reality hit Walz hard. Because it stripped the decision of symbolism. If the role would exist regardless, then refusing wasn't resistance. It was abdication. Meanwhile, cracks began to appear in the expected opposition. A handful of Democratic governors, off the record, expressed something unexpected. Curiosity. Not endorsement. Not support. But interest. They wanted to know what the role looked like. How much authority it held. Whether it could actually work. Walz wasn't alone anymore. And Trump knew it. That's when the final pressure point arrived. A deadline. Not publicly announced. Not tweeted. Not leaked. Privately communicated. Trump's intermediaries informed Walz that the initiative would be announced within 72 hours. With or without a name attached. If Walz wanted input on structure, safeguards, and scope, this was the window. 72 hours. The weight of that number settled in. Walz spent the first night talking to no one. He turned off his phone. He ignored messages. He walked. Alone. He thought about the phrase Trump had used. Trust the structure. He reviewed the safeguards he'd requested. The limitations he'd demanded. The protections that had been agreed to. He realized something unsettling. Trump had conceded more than expected. Not out of generosity. Out of confidence. Confidence that once Walz stepped in, the role would legitimize itself. The second day, Walz met with his closest advisors. This time, there was no debate. Only scenarios. If he accepted, how would he explain it? If he refused, how would he justify the consequences? If he delayed, how would he control the fallout? There was no clean exit. That night, a new narrative broke. Anonymous sources claimed Walz was leaning toward acceptance. Whether true or not, it changed the atmosphere instantly. Supporters felt betrayed. Opponents felt vindicated. Trump's allies felt emboldened. And Walz felt boxed in. The third day arrived with brutal clarity. Trump's team was ready. The announcement materials were drafted. The structure was finalized. All that was missing was a name. Walz requested one final conversation. Not with Trump. With himself. He wrote 2 statements. One accepting the role. One declining it. He read them both. The acceptance speech focused on responsibility. On service. On doing the hard thing. The rejection speech focused on principle. On independence. On resistance. He realized something painful. Only one of them actually changed anything. The call came in that afternoon. Trump. Brief. Direct. Are you in? Walz didn't answer immediately. He asked one last question. If this works, Walz said, do you step back and let it stand on its own? Trump paused. Then answered, yes. That pause mattered, because it meant Trump understood what Walz was really asking. Space. Room to operate without interference. Walz ended the call without confirming. But his decision was made. The question now wasn't what he would do. It was how the country would react. Because the moment he spoke next, there would be no undo button. In Part 6, the decision goes public. The announcement is made, the backlash ignites, and the nation watches as the political ground shifts beneath its feet. Because once the choice is revealed, nothing goes back to normal. The announcement came earlier than anyone expected. No teaser, no build-up, no dramatic countdown, just a briefing notice released quietly at dawn. By the time most of the country woke up, the decision was already made. Governor Tim Walz had accepted the federal role. The wording was precise, measured, almost clinical. He would serve as the lead coordinator of a new federal state initiative focused on national infrastructure resilience, emergency response alignment, and supply chain stabilization. He would remain governor of Minnesota. He would not change party affiliation. He would not campaign for Donald Trump. Those details mattered, but they didn't stop what came next. The reaction was instant, violent, in political terms. Supporters flooded social media with accusations of betrayal. Party leadership issued carefully worded statements expressing concern. Activist groups demanded resignations. Cable news panels spiraled into outrage within minutes. Some called it unprecedented. Others called it unforgivable. A few called it brave. Trump, notably, said nothing. That silence was strategic. He let Walz take the hit. Because this wasn't Trump's story anymore. It was Walz's. Walz stepped in front of the cameras later that day. No rally. No cheering crowd. No flags. Just a podium. He spoke plainly. I did not accept this role because it was easy, he said. I accepted it because refusing would have been easier. That line cut through the noise. He explained the structure, the safeguards, the limits of authority. He emphasized outcomes over allegiance, results over rhetoric. But the damage was already spreading. Donors pulled support. Party committees distanced themselves. Some allies stopped returning calls. At the same time, something unexpected happened. Governors started calling. Not all Democrats. Not all Republicans. Just governors. People dealing with floods, fires, grid failures, and shortages. They didn't ask about Trump. They didn't ask about politics. They asked how the initiative would work. That was the first crack in the backlash. Trump finally spoke that evening. Briefly, I asked Governor Walz to do a job, he said. He agreed to do the job. No praise. No insults. No theatrics. That restraint disarmed critics who were expecting provocation. Behind the scenes, the initiative went live immediately. Federal agencies complied. State offices engaged. Resources moved faster than usual. The system responded. Within weeks, early results emerged. Not miracles. Not transformations. But progress. Faster coordination. Clearer authority. Reduced friction. And slowly, quietly, the narrative shifted. Critics were still loud. Opposition remained fierce. But the results were undeniable. When a major supply chain disruption hit the Midwest, the response was faster than anything seen in years. When storms threatened multiple states, coordination happened in hours, not days. Walz didn't celebrate. He didn't posture. He worked. And that unsettled everyone. Because the story people wanted, a dramatic collapse, a public failure, a vindicating disaster, wasn't happening. Instead, something worse was happening. It was working. Party leadership faced a dilemma. Attacking Walz now meant attacking visible results. Defending him meant legitimizing cooperation with Trump. So they did neither. They waited. Trump watched from a distance. He didn't interfere. He didn't claim credit. He didn't sabotage the effort. That restraint was deliberate. He knew something others didn't. If this succeeded, it would change expectations. Not just about him, about governance itself.